What's up, guys? Spencer Sakurai here. And I'm back with a camera comparison. Now, this is a follow-up video for the last video I just put out over the Panasonic S1H, but this is going to be a comparison video with the S1H and cinema cameras. A lot of you requested in the comments that I compare this to a real cinema camera so you can kind of see the difference and kind of compare the price points and see where you kind of land on image quality. Now, if you watched the last video, I obviously talked a lot about the Panasonic S1H, and it wasn't a full review. It was just about the image quality. That's usually what I do here on this channel. I like to set up a scene and shoot something that really shows the image quality of a camera and less about the kind of ergonomics and why you might buy one in that regard. To do that, I set up a little scene that was inspired by a scene in the movie Gone Girl. Now, everyone probably knows on this channel that I get inspired by David Fincher's work quite often. I just kind of like his dark, moody feels. And I always think using a scene from a movie as inspiration to kind of work off of is a good way to compare cameras, so you can kind of see what it would look like in a more cinematic environment. Now, in the opening scene, I actually used two cameras, a cinema camera and the S1H, and I intercut them to see if you could tell the difference between the two while you're watching the scene. But I will let you know how I lit that and which camera was which in the scene at the end of this video. But let's first jump into some camera comparisons. So I just grabbed as many cinema cameras I had at my disposal to test out. So I just put them all up on a counter inside my parents' house here, and I shot them at my wife with some window light coming in, so you have a little bit of shape on her face and you have daylight to work with, so you can kind of see what the cameras would do in a more general scenario. Now, obviously, I couldn't get the same lens for all the cameras and get them all in the exact same position to get an exact comparison. Is definitely not scientific, but it'll give you just an insight on what these cameras look like side by side. So I set up the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, the Blackmagic Ursa Mini 4.6K, obviously the Panasonic S1H, and then I was also able to get my friend's Kinefinity Mavo LF. Now, the reason I wanted to use that as a comparison is because it's an actual full-frame cinema camera, and I have not tested one of those on this channel yet. So obviously, I thought it'd be good to compare it to another full-frame camera, because hopefully the S1H is going to look very similar to the Mavo, even though it has a much higher bitrate and a little bit more dynamic range. So I'm just going to add the appropriate Rec. 709 LUTs to all these cameras, and this is going to be more of a comparison of the dynamic range and look. First, the colors of each camera, because obviously each camera has its own color science. So here's a comparison with just the stock Rec. 709 LUTs applied to each camera, with a little bit of an exposure adjustment just to make sure everything is leveled out. And then here's another comparison with a little bit more color matching that I did in post myself. Now, all the shots that I did with the Panasonic S1H in this entire video are going to be at the 4K 422 10-bit codec, the all-I codec. I did not shoot in 6K, and if you heard me in my last video, I didn't want to shoot at 6K because it has a 10-bit 6K built into the camera, but the codec shoots at a 420 color space, which means that you're going to get the same latitude from your luminance at 10-bit, but you're not going to get the same latitude in the color. And so just for the sake of getting the best quality I could out of the camera, so I thought I would shoot in the 422 10-bit codec on this camera. I think really looking at the comparison, something to say is it's just kind of crazy how cameras have gotten so good these days. I mean, the range of price on these cameras ranges from around $1,000 all the way up to $15,000 when we're talking about the Mavo LF, and yet the images all look really nice. Of course, there's going to be differences between all of them, and they're not always going to handle the exact same way in the same lighting conditions, but it is kind of crazy how good cameras have gotten by the year 2020. So let's just jump into how the camera actually performs next to a cinema camera. And of course, I use the Mavo LF for the rest of the tests in this video. So each camera has a lot of different codec options, and obviously the Mavo LF has a lot more, especially when it comes to frame rates. You can actually get the 60 frames per second out of the more higher resolution, beefier codecs on that camera. First, on this camera, you have to crop into Super 35 to get some of those higher frame rates, and there's definitely going to be some trade-offs with the $4,000 camera versus a $15,000 camera kit. I mean, the Panasonic S1H is a mirrorless camera, and the Mavo LF is a proper cinema camera, and when you get it with this kit, it has the Kinefinity back on it, so it's going to have XLR ports on it, it's going to have all the SDI ports on the back of it. And also the Mavo LF shoots to SSD drives rather than shooting to an SD card like the Panasonic S1H. Now I only had 170 megabytes per second SD card when I was doing this comparison, so I could only get about 15 seconds of footage out of the 4K 42210-bit codec on the S1H. So definitely with that camera, you're going to want to shoot on the recommended SD card, which is a 300 megabytes per second SD card. That's still going to be a lot cheaper than a Kinefinity SSD drive, but you can use a standard SSD drive in this camera because it takes full-blown SSDs that you might put into like a laptop or something like that. And luckily they don't have proprietary drives like other cinema cameras do, like the Red cameras for instance. Either way, you're going to be spending a lot more money to get the Mavo LF. But that's not really what we're talking about here today. Obviously, you'll have to spend a lot more money to get a full-blown cinema camera that has every feature that you can imagine in the highest bitrate codecs possible. But we're just trying to figure out if the S1H can hold up from an image quality standpoint, just in case you don't want to spend the money for a full-blown, full-frame cinema camera. Now I have to say the Mavo LF has a really nice image coming out of it, and the color science seems to be way better than I would expect out of a kind of no-name camera company. So when I picked up the Mavo LF, I wanted to just kind of see what kind of image I could get out of it. So I set up a little comparison with the S1H and the Mavo LF. I was pouring some Jack Daniels into a glass, and I thought it looked really nice on the Mavo LF, but when I did it with the Panasonic S1H, the peaking on the back of it seemed to have failed me a little bit, and the shot was out of focus. So I'm not really able to use that for this video, but here's a little test shot so you can see how high quality the Mavo LF image is. But when I was doing that test, it reminded me of the scene in Gone Girl when Ben Affleck is sitting down, he's got some whiskey or something like that, and that's when they walk in and tell him that he's got all this credit card debt that he didn't know about. So I decided to do that instead because I thought that'd be a much better comparison for you guys to see how the cameras can handle against each other. Now this is a pretty dimly lit scene, and the lighting motivation is coming from all the practicals in the background in the kitchen. So luckily there was already some practical lights underneath the counters here in my parents' kitchen, so that was a good place for me to start. So then it was just a matter of adding another key light that I could get close to the color temperature of those lights to help me shape the rest of the light in the scene. Now I was shooting this in the middle of the day, so I had to put down the shades in my parents' kitchen, but then I was able to take my D&O lighting LED panel, the bicolor LED panel that I've done a video over in the past, and I was able to use that to kind of kick around the kitchen in different ways to help light each shot. Alright, so let me tell you which camera filmed each shot in this scene. The first shot is a close-up of the bourbon being poured into a glass. That was shot with the Panasonic S1H and the Canon FD 55mm. And for the first shot, I wanted to get a really nice soft light over the glass and the bourbon as I poured it. So I took the LED light panel and I shot it through a 6x6 quarter grid. It's just a nice fabric that you can shoot through to really diffuse the light and make it really soft. I'll have a link to that in the description below. Then I also put up a 501 reflector on the other side of the kitchen to just kind of block some of those other practical lights to help add shape to the side of the glass. And so for the next shot, we're going to cut to the wide from me walking from one part of the kitchen to the next part of the kitchen. And that one was actually on the Mavo LF this time and not the Panasonic S1H. And for that one, I didn't do much. All I did was kick the LED panel off the shears and the kind of wall over here, which is already kind of white and gray. So it bounced off that and it added a nice little key light on my face there. And I didn't have to diffuse that too much. It was already kind of being diffused by the bounce, but also in wide shots, you don't really have to diffuse them as much because you're not really going to notice the softness of the light as much because you're so far away from the subject. It actually helps carve the subject out a little bit more and add more contrast to your subject so you can more define them in your wide shot. And also something to note, I had both cameras set to 5600 Kelvin, but I had the light somewhere between 3200 and 4000 Kelvin, probably around 3500 Kelvin. So it really helped with that kind of goldish, tungsteny-ish tones that you might see a lot in a David Fincher film. For the next shot where I sit down and I'm looking at my phone, I have B&H's website pulled up and I'm looking at the S1H, clearly debating if I want to buy this camera or not. That shot was actually done with the Panasonic S1H and obviously the 55mm again. And for that I actually had the LED panel going through that diffusion again to give the softest light I could on the close-up. And I also had to use the 501 reflector to block off some daylight that was kind of leaking in through some of the shades in the background of the living room. It's always nice to have a 501 reflector of some sort of negative fill around to add shape to the other side of your image, just to block light from coming to places that you can't control, or just to really help get rid of any bounce that might be coming on your frame so you have full control of your lighting. Which is obviously something you'll hear me talk a lot about on this channel. I want to have full control of my lighting, and I'm not going to just do these camera tests. I'm just walking around outside because that doesn't really prove anything what the camera can do. Let's see what these cameras look like in a real scenario, something that you might actually do on a professional set. And then the last shot here, where is a close-up of my face, and I kind of look off and I'm debating if I'm going to buy the camera or not. That was done with the Mavo LF as well. So we have 2 shots with the Mavo LF and 2 shots with the Panasonic S1H, so you can kind of see what they look like and cut together. And on that one, and once again, it was the 55mm. I think it was at an f2 on that one. I think the rest were at like an f2.8, but this was at an f2 just to give a little bit more shallow depth of field in the background. But then once again, I just had the LED panel bounced off the wall. I don't even think I diffused that one. I think I just bounced it off the wall just to add some nice shape on my face. So the S1H was at its base ISO of 640 the whole time, and the Mavo LF was at its base ISO of 800. Now I didn't get a chance to do a low light comparison test with these 2 cameras. I didn't have very much time with the Mavo LF because I just borrowed it from a friend. But let me know in the comments below if you do want to see a full review over the Mavo LF. I'll try to do that one here very soon in the future. I'm sorry I didn't do the low light test, but it's not something I'm always looking to do because honestly, if you have a little bit of light and your base ISO is 640 or 800, you don't really need that much light to light a scene, and that low light situations really don't come up that often unless you're maybe shooting like a wedding or something like that. It's not something that I really have to worry about. I want to have the best negative exposure as I can on the camera, so I'm probably going to light as much as I can. That way when I get into post, I can have the most flexibility to move the image around. And let me know what you think about the quality. I mean, I know it's going to be compressed by YouTube, and these are all being downsampled from 6K. Do you think there's a big enough difference between the two to justify getting something like a Mavo LF over the S1H? I definitely could see the difference when I was looking at it myself in DaVinci before it was exported. I could definitely see the difference, but it was pretty small. I mean, I think that when you're working in a professional environment, you want the best camera you can get. That way nothing goes wrong when you're being paid for a job. But if you don't have the money, or if the gigs aren't big enough for you yet and you just want to get that S1H and you're kind of in the middle ground professionally, then I think it'd be a great camera, and I think it cuts together really well with the Mavo LF. I don't think you really need to stress about having a cinema camera right now if you're kind of in that in-between realm. Well, that's all I've got for this video. Let me know what you guys think about the comparison in the comments below. And for sure, let me know if you want me to do the Mavo LF review, and if you guys do, I will try to do that here in the future. Until next time, guys, I'm Spencer Sakurai. See ya.